So in this next section, we're going to talk, excuse me, to talk about puberty and sexuality. So while body growth during adolescence occurs for both boys and girls, there are sex differences in both the type and rate of growth. One of the hallmarks of puberty, as well as one of the first outward signs, is the dreaded growth spurt. Now, girls enter puberty a little bit earlier than boys. So for them, this spurt occurs around age 10, where for boys, it's a little later. This is where we see that awkward phase in middle school where the girls are so much taller and heavier than the boys. And this is true on average across adolescence, so across early adolescence. But the boys catch up around about age 13 and a half, and from then on tend to be larger than girls. Adolescents add 10 to 11 inches of height and 50 to 75 pounds of weight during adolescence, nearly 50% of their adult body weight. The proportions of growth are different too as bodies begin to mature and prepare for reproduction. For boys, we see a broadening of the shoulders and chest, lengthening of the legs, while for girls, we see a broadening of the hips, development of breasts, etc. And where the muscle and fat is carried also varies by sex. Boys will become more muscular in their upper bodies, while girls will start to develop more fat in their arms, legs, and torso. And this happens about ages 11 to 16, which will coincide with some issues with body image, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Now, for something that happens to literally every single person on the planet, regardless of gender, class, culture, etc., there sure are a lot of myths and misinformation out there. So take a second and think. Can you think about any myths or crazy stereotypes that you may have heard about puberty, either when you were growing up or now looking back as an adult? Some of the myths that I came up with are that if a female has her period, she can't swim or run. Girls shouldn't be allowed to touch pickles during menstruation. That was an interesting one. Period blood is dirty or impure when in fact it is the same blood that's in the rest of our bodies. You can't get pregnant if you have sex during your period. That is blatantly untrue and in fact is a dangerous myth. Using a tampon will make you lose your virginity. Penis size is related to the size of a man's hands or feet, and pimples are a result of being unclean. Have you heard of any of those throughout the course of your development? You probably have. They are all scientifically untrue. And so we know that puberty is a time of immense physical change, leading to a whole host of new challenges as the adolescent struggles to figure out how to deal with that change. And they're often getting a lot of misinformation like that, which I explained a second ago. Unsurprisingly, how they react to all of these changes is going to depend on many things, including prior knowledge of puberty, family support, and cultural attitudes. Prior knowledge of puberty is immensely important, especially for girls. Imagine having no idea what menstruation was and waking up one morning with pains in your stomach and your sheets covered in blood. That could be traumatic, right? We see this much less in developed countries, but even when early adolescents do get information from their parents or schools, they often feel embarrassed or ashamed to ask questions. This doesn't mean they don't have questions, though. So, what happens is they then turn to less reliable sources for information, like each other or to the internet. Some cultures actually view puberty as a milestone that's recognized with a formal celebration. In some tribal and village societies, there is an initiation ceremony to celebrate and mark the onset of puberty, essentially marking the young person as now an adult member of the community. We see this in Judaism with the bar or bat mitzvah and quinceañera in Hispanic communities. However, these practices of formally recognizing puberty are rare in Western societies and really tend to take place within ethnic or religious subcultures. Instead, Western societies offer up new freedoms, marking this this partial adult status, such as driving at 16, voting at 18, drinking at 21. But without a widely accepted marker of social and physical maturity, the process of entering adulthood becomes even more muddled. This sort of goes back to what we talked about earlier. Speaking of cultural differences, there are some cultures where menstruation is viewed as dirty or shameful. It's even considered bad luck to interact with a woman who's menstruating. In extreme cases, what this means is that girls will miss up to a week of school each month since they're not allowed to be near other children while they're menstruating. And so I included here a link to a page. It's called Around the World in 28 Periods, and it discusses how puberty is seen in various cultures. So take a look at that. It's pretty interesting. There are vast individual differences in when an individual enters puberty, but so what? Why should we care? Well, the timing of puberty is important for a couple reasons. First, early maturers tend to be treated as more adult like since they look more like adults. Another issue is that the gap between physical maturation and emotional maturation is greater in those who enter puberty early. So think about it. Those who enter puberty early are experiencing a whole range of physical and social changes before they may be cognitively ready to process them. Cultural ideals of physical attractiveness also factor in. The way that our bodies look during adolescence is often not in line with what's deemed attractive. Pimples, gangly limbs, weight gain. Ugh. There are several factors which influence pubertal timing. So, heredity is one. Twin studies show that identical twins are more similar than fraternal twins in pubertal milestones. Diet and exercise are related as well, although primarily for girls. Um, so, fat cells release a protein called leptin, which signals the brain to begin puberty, and may explain why heavier girls tend to begin puberty earlier than their lighter counterparts. Additionally, fat cells and exposure to light, which alters the melatonin cycle, can also affect puberty. Um, I know that thinner people who are exposed to less light enter puberty later. So, factors such as location, even living closer to the equator, and obesity can actually influence puberty. There's some ethnic differences. African American girls tend to enter puberty earlier than Caucasian girls, even when we control for things like weight and age. And we see some secular or generational trends in pubertal timing. So the age of pubertal onset has been decreasing over the past century, which researchers have attributed to a variety of factors, such as hormones fed to livestock, which we then consume, access to better nutrition and healthcare, and even increases in technology. So I talked about the light exposure. The blue light from our phones and our computers actually may be playing a role in dropping in starting puberty. In terms of adjustment, while much of the research points to early puberty being a major red flag in predicting subsequent adjustment problems, other approaches look at off time puberty. So it's not whether you develop early or late, it's that you develop differently from your peers. And given literature showing that anything that sets you apart from your peers, glasses, body size, sexuality, you name it, any of those differences leave you super vulnerable to negative peer feedback like victimization. This argument does make some sense, but there are sex differences. Of course, adolescent girls are already highly susceptible to negative body image, which can be greatly exacerbated by pubertal changes occurring early. Early maturing girls tend to be unpopular, withdrawn, low in confidence. They engage in more deviant behavior, often because they feel more at ease with older, more developmentally similar peers. On the contrast, girls who mature later tend to be popular, sociable, school leaders, and have more positive body image. For boys, early developers fare better. Boys value athletic skills and competition, so those who develop early have a leg up, so to speak, over their less physically mature peers. Early developing boys are therefore often athletic stars and leaders within the peer community, which are both associated with popularity and social status. On the other hand, later developing boys often show emotional difficulties, likely because they're still gangly and underdeveloped in relation to their peers, which certainly doesn't help them to fit in. Another big shift that occurs during adolescence has to do with sex. So we start to see the development of sexual attraction, the formation of a sexual identity, and the exploration of sexual behaviors. Once puberty kicks in, hormonal changes lead to a drastically increased sex drive. Unsurprisingly, therefore, during adolescence, there are some major sexual risk behaviors, such as engaging in sex very young, sex without a condom, increased risk of pregnancy due to the lack of contraception, a lack of overall knowledge about sex, and a lack of a good social support to go to for help or accurate information for sex. So when you put all of these together, we see teens at quite heightened risk. And so, overall, what we want to do is try to delay sexual activity until adolescents are physically and emotionally ready. And so, this has prompted researchers to identify some common characteristics of adolescents who engage in early sexual activity as a means of targeted intervention. And so some of these individual characteristics involve early pubertal timing, not surprising, childhood impulsivity, a weak sense of control over life events. Some family characteristics include having an economically disadvantaged background, um, coming from a neighborhood or family with conflict, weak parental monitoring. We know that peers are hugely important in adolescent behavior. So, what your peers are doing plays a big role in what you're doing. So, having sexually active friends, older siblings can be risk factors, as well as engaging in alcohol or substance use. And finally, educational characteristics include poor school performance and lower educational aspirations. Contraceptive use is on the rise among US adolescents. However, 14% of sexually active teens in the United States do not regularly use contraception. Now, there's a number of reasons for this, including peer pressure and heightened emotions, being unrealistic about consequences. I won't get pregnant, it'll be fine. Access, so not knowing where to access birth control, or how to discuss it with a partner, or simply feeling embarrassed, even if they do know where that they can go to health services on campus and get condoms, feeling very embarrassed or ashamed of doing so. There's also the spontaneity of the heightened dopamine and reproductive hormones that are floating around. Many teens will say, well, it just happened, or yeah, we didn't mean to. So preparedness tends to be a huge issue. Any idea what's one of the strongest predictors of condom usage? Previous condom usage. So if you start out using contraception during sexual activity, you are more likely to continue to do so. And that tells us something in terms of intervention efforts, that we need to catch them early and develop good safe sex practices from the very beginning. Unfortunately, young adults often lack access to this information, and more often they engage in risky behaviors, which increase the chance of them contracting an STI or having an unintended pregnancy. Challenges to contraceptive use include having a strained parental relationship or the belief that their parents aren't supportive. The complete hokum that is our sex education program, offering information that is incomplete at best and inaccurate at worst. Adolescents often report concern about health practitioner confidentiality, saying they don't want to go to their doctor to ask for pills or condoms because they worry they'll get ratted out to their parents. Other issues include partner pressure and coercion over condom use, and shame or embarrassment leading to failure to procure birth control. So, like I mentioned before, feeling really embarrassed to walk into a store and buy condoms. A recent Pew Research study found that 95% of teens have access to smartphones, and 45% of them report using them almost constantly. And so, understandably, parents and teachers and researchers are concerned about this screen time and its impact on their teens' cognitive, physical, and psychological health. But now we have something else to worry about, known widely as sexting. Sexting is generally defined as the sending and receiving of sexually suggestive or explicit photographs via a digital device. So the message can be sexual in the content of the text, like a suggestive comment, or an image, such as a nude or partially nude photograph. And sexting among teenagers appears to be on the rise. A recent meta analysis found that 1 in 7 teens reported sending sexts, 1 in 4 teens reported receiving a sext, and the number of teens who report engaging in these behaviors is on the rise. Another more recent study of high school students found that 29% were engaged in some form of consensual sexting. So why on earth do they do this? There's a bunch of reasons. So in today's digital world, our on and offline lives are deeply intertwined. And this is particularly true for adolescents who view online interactions as an extension of offline ones. For many young people, sending and receiving nude photographs is thought to be a digital courtship ritual. They're basically flirting with each other or showing it's a way of showing commitment in a relationship. Others report that they do it as a joke or to shock one another. And still others might do it for the status that's associated with juicy notoriety. So, my lab recently did a project looking at the content of rumors that were spread in a middle school. And what they found was that the rumors that spread the most were the juicy ones that contained some aspect of sex or what people were doing. And so, the people who were involved in those rumors got this temporary sort of notoriety, which was really appealing and beneficial. Maybe not beneficial, but it was appealing. So that leads to the question of, is sexting just normal? Is this a normal part of development, or is it a health problem? Unfortunately, much of the research points towards this being problematic. So, a 2018 report found that teens often felt coerced to send these naked pictures. Sexting can function as an online extension to offline sexual coercion in adolescent relationships. And so, those who experience sexting coercion endorsed more symptoms of anxiety, depression, and generalized trauma than those who didn't. Further, those who experienced sexting coercion were more likely to experience physical sexual coercion and intimate partner violence. Unsurprising, given that one of the biggest predictors of sexual violence is previous sexual violence. Research has also found that posting sexual or indiscreet content is one of the strongest predictors of cyber victimization among adolescents. Another very serious consequence of sexting is having a sex forwarded to others or posted online without consent. So, in one study, 12% of teens reported forwarding a sext without consent, 8.4% reported having a sext they sent forwarded without consent. And having a sex forwarded to others can result in harassment, cyberbullying, blackmail, which can lead to subsequent depression, suicidality. Once a sext is sent, the sender has no control of what happens to that picture. And even if it's sent via apps that claim to delete the picture, like Snapchat, there are still digital footprints, screenshots can be taken. And adolescents may simply not have the cognitive control capacity to understand what that means, that once something is there, it's there forever. Actually read a study in the course of my dissertation work that showed that employers will look for you on social media and part of as part of their screening process. And so these behaviors that you engage in as an adolescent that you think are very harmless may actually come back to bite you as an adult. Here's another question for you. Should sexting be punishable by law? It currently is. Any idea why? In the United States, 23 states consider sexting among teenagers to be the crime of possession of child pornography, and it can actually result in prison sentences and registration on a sex offender registry. While these types of outcomes aren't common, they're also not unheard of. So, in the United Kingdom, where sexting between minors is considered a crime, the police have investigated over 6,000 children under the age of 14. So, what's happening is that teens are facing jail time, counseling, other charges for sending pictures of their own body to somebody else because it's considered distribution of child pornography. So, whether or not this legality issue is sort of helping or hurting the problem is up for debate, but the fact remains that even an adolescent having naked picture of themselves is considered possession of child pornography and can be punished as such. Half of all new STIs are reported among people aged 15 to 24 years old. 1 in 4 sexually active adolescent females has an STI, such as chlamydia or HPV. Compared with older adults, sexually active adolescents and young adults are at higher risk of acquiring STIs, which may reflect factors like barriers to assessing quality STI prevention, which we've already talked about. In terms of education, teens are often unaware of what behaviors put them at risk. Many will say things like, oh, you can't get an STI from oral sex, which we know is not true. Once again, we see economically disadvantaged teens at the greatest risk, um, likely also due to education and access. While symptoms and complications of STIs vary based on the type, in extreme cases, they can lead to sterility and life threatening complications. The most serious STI is HIV and AIDS. The prevalence is much higher in the United States compared to other Western nations, perhaps due to the way the United States approaches sexual education, resulting in teenagers who are poorly informed about STIs and how to protect themselves. Moving on, let's talk a little bit about pregnancy and parenthood. So, the United States has the highest teen pregnancy rate in the Western world, most of which pregnancies are unintentional. 625,000 US teen pregnancies were reported in a recent study, with 11,000 of them being under the age of 15. It's kind of mind blowing. Although the teen birth rate in the United States has declined steadily throughout the 1990s, the rate began to increase in 2006 and 7, although we've started to see a drop again in recent years. 89% of adolescent births are to unmarried mothers, and 1 in 4 teenage pregnancies end in abortion. So, what puts a teen at risk of becoming an adolescent parent? Some of the usual culprits are at play: low parental warmth, neglect, abuse, poor school achievement, substance use, low SES. We know that teen mothers there are considerable health risks both for the mothers and the babies. So teen mothers are less likely to finish high school. They're more likely to receive public assistance compared to women who delay childbearing. They have higher rates of suicidal ideation, are more likely to experience PTSD. This could be because teen moms are more likely to have already gone through some semblance of mental and physical abuse. Other studies have found that teenage mothers experience postpartum depression at a rate that's twice as high as women age 25 and older. Other findings are that teen mothers face significant levels of stress that can often lead to enhanced mental health concerns. Children are often born prematurely and suffer from low birth weight. They experience academic and behavioral issues in school and are more likely to become teen parents themselves. So we very much see a cycle of risk. The educational and occupational attainment for teen mothers is also impacted, particularly in the absence of family support. It can be very difficult to go to school or to work when you have an infant at home that needs full-time care. There's risks for the child as well. Just higher rates of pregnancy and birth complications, the weaker parenting skills. Parents may be harsh or abusive or resentful. According to the US Department of Health and Human Services, children born to adolescent parents face greater challenges throughout the course of their lives. So this isn't something that goes away. So these challenges may include less education, worse behavioral and physical health outcomes. Children of teenage mothers experience a greater risk for lower birth weight and infant mortality, which, if you remember from our earlier lectures, are major risk factors for a whole host of other problems. So what happens is these effects can create a cycle for teenage mothers, their children, and their children's children. So once you sort of fall into this cycle, it can be very difficult to break out. Another concern is that teen pregnancies are often the result of sexual contact between a male over the age of 25 and a female under the age of 18. Urban, low-income African American and Latino teens are particularly at high risk for both teen pregnancy and statutory rape. Furthermore, adult males are most often responsible for both sexual assault cases and instances of teen pregnancy. Adult males who father children with teen mothers often have behavioral issues, lower levels of education and income, and a history of cohabitation with minors. Given that the majority of teen pregnancies are the result of unwanted sexual contact between a minor and an adult male, it's estimated that as many as 2/3 of teen births may be the result of statutory rape. That's mind-blowing. In light of the consequences and costs of teen childbearing and the recent increase in the teen birth rate in the United States, policy changes are clearly imperative, both in terms of prevention and intervention. Now, obviously, it's ideal to intervene before the pregnancy occurs, so this places a strong need on effective prevention programs. First, comprehensive sex education, including information on and access to contraceptives, should be the rule throughout the country, and federal grants should provide funding for these programs. States should be educated about research findings showing that comprehensive sexual education is far more effective than abstinence-only programs. And these courses need to begin before adolescents start having sex, or it's too late. We also need to be aware of the gap between knowledge and behavior. Just because adolescents learn information about safe sex practices and know all the right answers doesn't mean they're using them in the heat of the moment. So, in addition to stats and knowledge, we also need to teach skills for handling sexual situations, such as conversations about how to bring up contraceptives with a partner. And finally, teens who are looking forward to a promising future tend to be more careful about engaging in early and unsafe sex. So, by building academic and social competence and expanding educational, vocational, and employment opportunities for adolescents, we can help give them good reasons to delay sexual activity. But once pregnancy occurs, which it does, we then move into the realm of intervention. And so young parents need healthcare, they need encouragement and incentives to stay in school, job and life management training, parenting instruction, mentors, social support, affordable childcare, etc. With these factors in place, some of the negative impacts of early parenting that we've talked about throughout the class might be mitigated, helping to break that cycle that we talked about. So, in the next section, we'll talk about some of the other health issues. We've gone through most of the sexuality related ones, but don't worry, there's more.